Hello, friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did. Also, don't forget to press the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. From which country or city do you follow the channel? The chains lay on the floor again, locks opened, links scattered like dead snakes across the concrete. I stood in the doorway of the basement, my body aching from another night spent God knows where. Frost clung to my boots, mud caked the hem of my ranger uniform. 6 months. 6 months since Blackwood Forest. 6 months of running. 6 months of failing. I trudged to the small bathroom, bracing myself before looking in the mirror. Dark circles rimmed my eyes, deeper than yesterday. My once vibrant green eyes had dulled to the color of stagnant pond water. As I splashed cold water on my face, I noticed fresh markings on my forearm. Intricate spirals and angular symbols identical to those I'd seen in Northridge before. Everything went to hell. Not again. I whispered, scrubbing at them. They didn't fade. They never did. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen of my ranger cabinet, whispering Pines National Park. I'd chosen this posting specifically 300 miles from Miller's Creek, isolated enough that when I finally lost control completely, maybe I wouldn't hurt anyone. The park administration had been desperate enough for winter staff that they hadn't looked too closely at why a ranger would request such a remote outpost. I pulled out my journal from its hiding place, a hollowed-out field guide to local plant life, and made another entry. Day 183. Woke in the forest again. Northeast quadrant, judging by the terrain. Approximately 2 miles from cabin. Chains unlocked. New markings on left forearm. Identical pattern. To North Ridge site. Voice stronger yesterday during Thompson Creek patrol. Lost 3 hours. Found myself completing incident reports I don't remember writing. The radio crackled, startling me. I knocked my coffee mug to the floor where it shattered, brown liquid seeping between the floorboards. Ranger Hayes, you copy? The voice belonged to Park Superintendent Garcia, checking in from the main office 30 miles south. I grabbed the handset. Hayes here, go ahead. Just checking your status before the storm rolls in. Forecast says we're looking at 8 inches by nightfall. Roads will be impassable for at least 3 days. I'm stocked up. Should be fine. My voice sounded normal, steady, a lie. Good man. Don't forget to log your patrols. Been missing some of your check-ins. I glanced at the stack of papers on my desk, reports filled with my handwriting that I had no memory of completing. Sorry about that. Radio's been spotty. Won't happen again. No problem. Just protocol. Stay safe up there, Hayes. Will do. Hayes out. I replaced the handset and leaned against the wall, suddenly dizzy. A familiar pressure built behind my eyes, like something pushing outward from inside my skull. They're coming to find us soon, whispered a voice that wasn't mine but used my vocal cords anyway. Winter will keep them. Feed them to us. Shut up. I hissed, pressing my palms against my temples. There's no us. Laughter echoed inside my head, a layered, multi-tone sound like dozens of voices speaking in unison. The smiling one, that's what the cult in Blackwood Forest had called it, the entity that had latched onto me during the investigation. That had hollowed me out from the inside. That was slowly taking control. I pushed away from the wall and grabbed my jacket. I needed to patrol, needed routine, needed to stay human for as long as possible. The forest welcomed me with silent, snow-laden branches. My breath fogged in the frigid air as I trudged along the hiking trail, checking markers and keeping watch for any foolhardy hikers who might have ignored the weather warnings. The physical exertion helped quiet the voice, at least temporarily. Hours later, I returned to find deer gathered around my cabin. 6 of them standing perfectly still, watching the building with unblinking eyes. They didn't scatter at my approach. Instead, they turned their heads in unison to stare at me. Get out of here, I shouted, waving my arms. The deer blinked simultaneously, then melted back into the forest with unnatural coordination. Inside, I found muddy paw prints crossing my floor, too small for deer, fox, maybe, or raccoon. Something had been in my cabin while I was away. I followed the prints to my desk where my journal lay open. though I'd hidden it before leaving. My hands trembled as I picked it up. New writing filled the page in my handwriting. The door is opening. We are becoming. Spring will bring the gathering. I slammed the journal shut and shoved it back into its hiding place. Night was falling, and with it, the storm. Snow already pelted against the windows as wind howled through the trees. Once I would have found the isolation comforting. Now it felt like a prison, or worse, like I was the warden of something that needed to be contained. In the basement, I prepared the chains again, securing them to the concrete support pillar. The ritual had become familiar. Lock the heavy manacles around my wrists and ankles. Hide the key on the highest shelf where I couldn't reach it while restrained. It never mattered. By morning, I'd be free, standing somewhere in the forest with no memory of how I got there. I won't let you win, I said to the empty air. Whatever you're planning, I'll stop it. You are the plan, came the reply, using my voice but twisting it into something wrong. You've always been the plan. I secured the last lock and sat on the cold floor, back against the pillar. Outside, the storm intensified. The wind seemed to whisper words just beyond comprehension. The animals would come again tonight, gathering at my windows, watching. They always did. As darkness fell completely, I felt the familiar sensation of something unfurling inside me, stretching through my body like fingers testing their reach. Behind my eyes, pressure built until I saw flashes of places I'd never been. Stone altars, ancient trees, faces twisted in worship or agony. I knew what would happen next. Blackness would take me and I'd wake somewhere else. The chains would be unlocked. New markings would adorn my skin. More time lost, more control slipping away. The first snow of winter battered the cabin above me. Soon the roads would be impassable. No one would come, no one would go. Isolation had seemed like safety when I'd requested this post. 3 days after the snowstorm, the chains lay empty on the basement floor again. I'd woken up beside a frozen creek, half a mile from my cabin, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My uniform had been soaked through, ice crystallizing along the hems. It took an hour of huddling beside the fireplace before feeling returned to my extremities. I just finished changing into dry clothes when sharp knocks echoed through the cabin. My heart raced. No one should be able to reach me. The roads were supposed to be impassable. I opened the door to find Sheriff Catherine Reeves on my porch, snowflakes catching in her salt and pepper hair. Her cruiser was parked behind my truck, chains on the tires. "Sheriff," I said, trying to mask my surprise, didn't expect visitors. Her piercing blue eyes scanned me from head to toe. "Our weekly check-in. Hayes, you forgot again?" I blinked. Weekly check-in. Was this another thing I'd agreed to during my blackouts? Right. Sorry, come in. I stepped aside, desperately trying to remember if I'd hidden my journal and secured the basement door. Sheriff Reeves stomped snow from her boots and entered, her eyes sweeping across the cabin. Nothing escaped her notice. The coffee mug shards I'd missed cleaning up, the muddy footprints on the floor, the deep scratches on the inside of the door. "You look like hell, Connor," she said, removing her gloves. "When's the last time you slept?" "Last night." The lie came easily. "Really?" She stepped closer, studying my face. "Those circles under your eyes suggest otherwise." I moved toward the kitchen. "Coffee." "Sure." My hands trembled as I filled the pot with water. The entity stirred behind my eyes, pressure building in my skull. "Roads cleared faster than expected," I said, trying to distract myself. "County got the plows out early. We needed to." She leaned against the counter. "We've got a situation. 3 hikers went missing 2 days ago, college students from Westlake. They were camping on Aspen Loop Trail." My stomach clenched. Aspen Loop was in my patrol zone, less than 4 miles from here, during the storm. That's suicide. They went up before the weather alert. Last check-in was Tuesday morning. She watched me carefully. "Their emergency beacon activated yesterday, but the signal cut out after 10 minutes. We could find them for you," I heard myself say, but the voice wasn't quite mine. It had that layered quality, like multiple voices speaking at once. Sheriff Reeves frowned. "What was that?" I cleared my throat, fighting for control. "I said I could help you find them." "That's not..." She shook her head. Never mind. My team's assembling at the trailhead in 30 minutes. I want you there. Of course. As she turned to leave, she paused. Connor, is everything okay with you? You seem different lately. Just tired. The isolation gets to you after a while. She nodded slowly. 30 minutes haze. Don't be late. The abandoned campsite looked wrong. Not just ransacked by wildlife or damaged by the storm. Wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. The 3 tents remained standing, yet each had been meticulously turned inside out, like someone had peeled them. Their sleeping bags had been arranged in a perfect triangle, contents emptied but organized by color. What do you make of this? Sheriff Reeves asked, her breath fogging in the cold air. I crouched beside one of the sleeping bags, not animals, too organized. Deputy Collins approached from the perimeter. No tracks leading away from camp, not even the hikers' own footprints. Storm would have covered them, I suggested. Maybe. He didn't sound convinced. I moved toward the center of the triangle formed by the sleeping bags. Something caught my eye. Small structures arranged in a circle. I knelt down for a closer look. They were twig dolls, about 6 inches tall, intricately woven with sinew and hair. Each had a different configuration of limbs. Some with too many, others with none at all. I picked one up, turning it over. In its chest cavity, nestled among dried leaves, were teeth. Human teeth. Sheriff, I called, my voice strained, you need to see this. She knelt beside me, pulling on a latex glove before taking the doll from my hands. Jesus Christ. I reached for another doll, tearing it open. More teeth, and another, and another. The 5th doll contained a single tooth, positioned where the heart would be. Recognition hit like a physical blow. It was my tooth, my right upper premolar that had been knocked out in a climbing accident when I was 19. I'd had a crown put in years ago, but that was impossible. My tongue found the crown in my mouth still firmly in place. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. The entity stirred within me, seemingly pleased. We told you they were coming, it whispered in my head. We arranged this welcome. Hayes, you okay? Sheriff Reeves was watching me, eyes narrowed. Fine, I managed, closing my fist around the tooth. Just disturbed. You recognize something? It wasn't a question. I shook my head. No, just wondering what kind of person would do this. She studied me for a long moment before turning to address the search team. Fan out. 20-foot intervals. Look for any sign of the hikers. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I shoved them into my pockets, desperately trying to appear normal as I joined the search. An hour later, Deputy Collins called out from the eastern edge of the search area. We converged on his position to find him pointing at a large pine tree. Carved into the bark was a symbol, the same spiraling pattern that had appeared on my forearm after my blackouts. It seemed to pulse with its own energy. There's more, Collins said, gesturing ahead. They make a trail. Sure enough, every few trees bore similar markings, leading deeper into the forest. We follow them, Sheriff Reeves ordered. As the team moved ahead, I stepped closer to the first marked tree. Something compelled me to touch the symbol. The moment my fingertips made contact, the carving seemed to shift beneath them. Like something living just below the surface of the bark, I jerked my hand back, heart hammering in my chest. Connor, Sheriff Reeves called from ahead. You coming? I stared at the symbol, which now appeared completely normal. Just a carving and bark. Yeah, I called back, my voice unsteady. Right behind you. As I moved to follow, I caught my reflection in a patch of ice, clinging to the tree trunk. For just a moment my eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and my mouth stretched into a smile too wide for my face. I drove away from the campsite with the stolen tooth hidden in my pocket and dread building in my chest. My reflection caught in the rearview mirror showed a man I barely recognized, the brief flash of that unnatural smile at the campsite still haunting me. 2 hours later, I pulled into Northridge University's visitor parking. Professor Eliza Morgan had agreed to meet me after a desperate phone call where I'd claimed to need expert insight on a cultural artifact related to a park investigation. I hadn't mentioned the tooth, the dolls, or the fact that something was eating me alive from the inside. I checked my pocket for the 10th time, making sure the photos I'd taken of the twig dolls were still there. along with close-ups of the markings on my skin. Professor Morgan's office door stood ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling into the dim hallway. I knocked lightly. Come in, please mind the stacks." Her voice was bright and energetic. I pushed the door open to find a room that looked like an academic tornado had touched down. Books towered in precarious columns. Display cases housed masks with creepy features. Shelves overflowed with artifacts, bone fragments, stone carvings, primitive tools, and what appeared to be dried plant specimens in labeled jars. The professor herself matched her surroundings. Organized chaos. Wild gray curls escaped a messy bun, and reading glasses perched unused atop her head. Colorful scarves draped her shoulders despite the building's oppressive heating system. She looked up from her desk, ink stains visible on her fingers. Ranger Hayes, I presume. She stood navigating the maze of artifacts with practiced ease. "Professor Eliza Morgan, your call sounded urgent. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Academic curiosity is my weakness. You mentioned ritual artifacts?" Her eyes sparkled with intellectual hunger. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photos. These were found at a campsite where 3 hikers disappeared during the storm. She took the phone, her expression shifting from excited to disturbed as she swiped through images of the twig dolls. "And there's more." I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the spiraling symbols etched into my skin. "These markings, they're connected. I need to understand what they mean." Professor Morgan's eyes widened. She carefully placed my phone on her desk and retrieved a magnifying glass from a cluttered drawer. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to my arm. I nodded, extending my arm across her desk. She examined the markings in silence, occasionally making small sounds of recognition or concern. "How long have you had these?" she finally asked. 6 months. They started after an investigation in Blackwood Forest." She sat back, removing her reading glasses from atop her head to actually use them, peering intently at my face. "You've heard of the Carter family from Miller's Creek?" My blood ran cold. "Yes. They were connected to ritualistic murders 20 years ago, much older than that." She turned to a filing cabinet, yanking open a drawer with practiced efficiency. "The Carters have been in that region for over 200 years, though they've gone by different names throughout the generations." She extracted a worn folder and spread several photographs across her desk. They showed cave paintings, stone tablets, and ancient pottery, all bearing symbols identical to those on my skin. "What you're marked with, Ranger Hayes, is very old. It's connected to an entity some texts call the Smiling One, a being that exists between dimensions, constantly seeking full manifestation in our world." My mouth went dry. "How does it manifest?" 3 phases, according to the texts. She held up one finger. First, finding a vessel through ritual marking. The vessel is prepared through exposure to specific artifacts, usually followed by burning them. The burning completes the connection. I remembered the twig dolls I'd gathered as evidence, how they'd inexplicably caught fire in my truck on the drive back to my cabin. I'd assumed I'd dropped a cigarette. "The second phase," she continued, another finger, "involves consuming the life force of 9 specific individuals, each representing different aspects of human existence. The disappearances you mentioned may be connected to this." The pressure behind my eyes intensified. I gripped the edge of her desk. "And the third," I managed to ask. "A willing sacrifice at the binding site, a place where the veil between dimensions is thinnest. This completes the manifestation, allowing the entity to fully exist in our world." She pulled out another file, this one containing newspaper clippings. "The Carter family has orchestrated these rituals for generations. They serve as shepherds, guiding the entity's manifestation. The most recent known member is Abigail Carter, though she likely goes by another name now." The entity inside me surged, clawing at my consciousness. My vision blurred, replaced by flashes of a young woman with unnaturally pale skin and a too-wide smile. "Abby knows us. Abby prepares the way," the voice whispered inside my head. I doubled over, fighting for control. "Ranger Hayes, are you all right?" Professor Morgan's voice seemed distant. With tremendous effort, I straightened. "I'm fine, just tired." Her expression showed she didn't believe me. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying my face with new intensity. "Your eyes," she said quietly. "They changed color just now." "A trick of the light," I lied, even as I felt the entity receding, satisfied with what it had learned. Professor Morgan nodded slowly, then turned to adjust a small statue on her bookshelf. I didn't notice the red recording light until she stepped away. "Is that a camera?" I asked, tension creeping into my voice. "Standard procedure when examining artifacts," she replied smoothly. "University policy for documentation." We both knew it was a lie, but I didn't challenge her. Instead, I gathered the photos, rolling my sleeve down to hide the markings. "Thank you for your insights, Professor. This has been educational." "Ranger Hayes." Her voice stopped me at the door. "Whatever is happening to you, it isn't too late to stop it. The texts suggest the vessel can reject the entity before the third phase, but it requires tremendous willpower." I nodded without turning. "I'll keep that in mind." The drive back to Whispering Pines felt endless. Snow began falling again, fat flakes swirling in my headlights. I flicked on the radio for distraction, settling on a news station. Halfway through a weather report, the station changed by itself, static giving way to music. An old folk tune played, something about smiling in the dark. I pressed the scan button, finding another station. Seconds later, the same song began playing again. I hit the power button. The radio remained on. "Smile when the darkness comes. Smile when they call your name." I punched the dashboard, pain shooting through my knuckles. The music continued, uninterrupted. "Smile as the shadows grow, never to be the same." For the rest of the drive, the song played on repeat, no matter what buttons I pressed. The entity hummed along inside my head, seeming to know every word by heart. The drive back from Professor Morgan's office left me drained, the radio's haunting folk song still echoing in my mind as I pulled into the Whispering Pines Sheriff's Station. Snow continued to fall, and lazy flakes dusting my jacket as I trudged toward the entrance. Sheriff Reeves had called an hour ago. "Need you at the station?" New developments on those missing hikers. The fluorescent lights of the station buzzed overhead as I stepped inside, their harsh glow making my headache worse. The entity had been restless since my meeting with Professor Morgan, pushing against my consciousness like waves testing a dam for weakness. Sheriff Reeves stood by the front desk, reviewing a stack of papers. She looked up as I entered, those piercing blue eyes missing nothing. "A haze." "You look like hell," she said with no warmth in her voice. "Nice to see you too, Sheriff." I attempted a smile that felt more like a grimace. "What's this about the hikers? Not just the hikers anymore." She gestured toward her office. "We've got company from Miller's Creek PD." My pulse quickened at the mention of Miller's Creek. A man in a deputy's uniform stood examining a map on the wall, his back to us. When he turned, I recognized Deputy Marcus Collins from the search party earlier. "Ranger Hayes," he said with a nod, his expression carefully neutral. "Good to see you again." Something about his flat brown eyes made my skin crawl. They revealed nothing like looking at painted glass. "Deputy Collins has jurisdiction over a case that might be connected to our missing hikers," Sheriff Reeves explained, settling behind her desk. She gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs opposite her. I lowered myself into the seat, keeping my posture deliberately casual. "What kind of connection?" Collins pulled a file from his bag and placed it on the desk between us. "Two bodies were discovered yesterday in an abandoned mining shaft outside Miller's Creek. Evan and Laura Carter." The name sent a jolt through me. Inside my head, the entity stirred, suddenly alert. "The Carters," I repeated, fighting to keep my voice steady. Collins opened the file, revealing crime scene photos that made my stomach lurch. The bodies had been arranged in a perfect circle, facing upward, with arms and legs splayed in a star pattern. Their mouths were fixed in grotesque, too-wide smiles. Most disturbing of all, their teeth had been removed. Every single one. "Jesus," I whispered, looking away. Sheriff Reeves pushed another photo forward. "Look familiar?" It showed symbols carved into the rock wall surrounding the bodies, the same spiraling patterns etched into my skin, the same markings we'd found on the trees near the hikers' campsite. My arm burned beneath my sleeve as if the symbols were being carved anew. "We've seen these before." I acknowledged, careful not to reveal too much. There's more, Collins said, pulling out another file. Abby Carter, their daughter, is missing. No sign of her at the scene or their residence. He placed a third file on the desk. Older, the edges worn and yellowed with age. The label read, Tanner J. Personal Investigation, Carter Family 1978, 2022. Sheriff James Tanner Collins explained my predecessor. He supposedly committed suicide 3 months ago, but I found this hidden in his home while clearing his effects. Sheriff Reeves opened the inside were decades of notes, photographs, and newspaper clippings, all related to the Carter family. Tanner had been investigating them for over 40 years. Collins continued. He believed they were part of a cult dating back centuries. They called themselves the Eternal Smile. The pressure behind my eyes intensified, becoming almost unbearable. The entity surged forward with such force that I gasped, gripping the arms of my chair. According to Tanner's notes, Collins said, seemingly oblivious to my distress, the cult worshipped an entity they believed existed between dimensions. They performed rituals to help it manifest in our world. He knows too much. The entity roared inside my head, its voice a cacophony of overlapping tones. He'll ruin everything. Hayes? Sheriff Reeves was looking at me with concern. You okay? I tried to respond, but my throat constricted. The room began to spin, darkness encroaching at the edges of my vision. I felt myself falling, my body no longer under my control. He's seizing. Sheriff Reeves's voice seemed to come from miles away. Collins, help me get him on his side. As hands grabbed me, the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of fractured images. I was no longer in the sheriff's station. I stood in a clearing in a forest I didn't recognize. A stone altar dominated the center, surrounded by hooded figures holding torches. Their faces were obscured except for their mouths, each stretched into an identical, unnatural smile. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9, stood at the edge of the circle. Her skin was unnaturally pale, her dark hair hanging limply around her face. She didn't wear a hood, but her expression mirrored the adults, that same terrible smile. On the altar lay a boy, no older than 12. His eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down his face. The hooded figures began to chant, their voices merging into a single layered sound. The vessel accepts. The door will open. The smiling one comes. One of the figures stepped forward, raising a curved knife. Watch closely, Abby, the figure said, turning to the young girl. One day you will perform this sacred duty. Abby's smile widened as she watched her brother scream, the knife descending in a terrible arc. I jerked awake with a ragged gasp, disoriented and drenched in cold sweat. I was lying on a worn couch in what appeared to be the station's break room. Sheriff Reeves sat across from me, a foam cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Her expression was guarded, her posture tense. Welcome back, she said. No warmth in her voice. You've been out for almost 40 minutes. I struggled to sit up, my limbs heavy and uncooperative. What happened? You tell me. She leaned forward. 1 minute you're fine. The next you're on the floor, convulsing and speaking in. She hesitated, speaking in multiple voices at once. My blood ran cold. What did I say? Nothing coherent. She studied me intently. What's your connection to the Carters, Hayes? I don't have one, I replied too quickly. Then why did you react that way when Collins mentioned them? Why did you mutter the name Abby repeatedly while unconscious? I swallowed hard, my throat painfully dry. I don't know. Sheriff Reeves set her coffee down with deliberate care. I've known you 6 months, Connor. You're a good ranger, dedicated. But lately something's off. The sleepwalking, the memory lapses, the physical changes. Her eyes narrowed. Your eyes aren't even the same color anymore. I looked away, unable to meet her gaze. I'm just tired, stressed. Bullshit. The word came out sharp as a knife. I've seen your medical report from last month's physical. Elevated heart rate, abnormal brain activity, unexplained markings on your skin. The doctor recommended psychiatric evaluation. It's nothing, I insisted. Nothing doesn't cause seizures. She stood up. I'm putting you on administrative leave, effective immediately. Get help, Hayes. Real help. The door opened, and Deputy Collins entered. He'd removed his jacket, and I noticed something protruding from his shirt pocket. A small twig figure, similar to the dolls we'd found at the campsite. My heart hammered against my ribs. "How are you feeling, Ranger?" Collins asked, his voice neutral. His hand rested casually near his holstered weapon, a gesture that seemed deliberately calculated. "Better," I lied. "Just exhausted." I think Collins nodded, his eyes revealing nothing. The bodies of the mining shaft, they were positioned exactly like this. He made a star shape with his arms. Ritual positioning. Tanner's notes called it the doorway configuration. Sheriff Reeves shot him a warning look. "That's enough, Collins. Hayes needs rest." "Of course." Collins stepped back, but his eyes remained fixed on me. "Just thought he should know what we're dealing with." I stood carefully, using the arm of the couch for support. I should get home before the roads get worse. Sheriff Reeves didn't try to stop me. "We'll talk tomorrow, Hayes. After you've rested." I nodded, avoiding eye contact with both of them as I gathered my jacket. As I reached the door, Collins spoke again. "Strange about those teeth, isn't it? All removed, yet none found at the scene." I paused, the tooth in my pocket feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Strange," I agreed, then fled before they could see the panic in my eyes. Night had fallen by the time I left the station, the snow illuminated by my headlights as I drove slowly back toward my cabin. My mind raced with everything I'd learned. Carter's, the Eternal Smile cult, Sheriff Tanner's decades-long investigation, and that vision of young Abby watching her brother's sacrifice. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed it. Deputy Collins' patrol car parked on a secluded forest road, headlights off. I slowed, pulling over behind a stand of trees. Collins stood beside his vehicle, a satellite phone pressed to his ear. In his other hand, he held what looked like a map. Even from this distance, I recognized the outline of Blackwood Forest, the place where my nightmare had begun 6 months ago. I killed my engine, rolling down my window to listen. Collins's voice carried in the still night air. "Found Hayes, just like you said. He's the vessel. No question, the markings match." A pause. "Yes, the symbols are identical to the altar stones." Another longer pause. "I understand. The spring equinox. That gives us 3 months to prepare the site." He folded the map. "Don't worry about Sheriff Reeves. She suspects something's wrong with Hayes, but she doesn't know what. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late." Inside my head, the entity purred with satisfaction. For once, we were in perfect agreement. Deputy Collins was not what he appeared to be. Deputy Collins' conversation faded behind me as I sped toward my cabin, hands trembling on the steering wheel. The cabin appeared through the trees after far too long. I barely remembered parking, stumbling up the porch steps, fumbling with keys that wouldn't stop shaking in my grip. Once inside, I collapsed against the door, sliding down until I hit the floor. The conversation I'd overheard replayed in my mind. The vessel, the spring equinox, 3 months to prepare the site. "What are you doing to me?" I whispered to the presence inside me. "Becoming. We are becoming." Pain lanced through my skull, bright and sharp. I clutched my head, a cry escaping my lips as visions flashed before my eyes. Northridge Trail at night, the stone formations in the moonlight, the restricted section of Blackwood Forest where the first body had been found 6 months ago, a clearing with an ancient altar stone, surrounded by hooded figures, a girl with a too-wide smile watching from the shadows. The visions intensified, more detailed than ever before. I could smell pine needles, feel the rough texture of bark against my fingertips, and hear whispered chants rising from the altar. "Stop it!" I shouted, slamming my palm against the wall. The wood splintered beneath my hand, leaving a crater in the paneling. I stared at it, then at my hand. No pain, no blood, just a faint pulsing glow in the veins beneath my skin. I rose, legs steadier than they had any right to be. Outside the window, 3 deer stood watching the cabin. When I raised my hand, they moved in perfect unison, stepping closer to the glass. "They hear us now." The voice purred inside my head. "All the forest creatures. They serve us." My vision shifted, and the dim cabin suddenly illuminated as if in daylight. I could see every detail with perfect clarity. Dust particles suspended in the air, the microscopic cracks in the wooden beams overhead, a spider building its web in the far corner. Power surged through me, a dark tide washing away my fatigue. My muscles coiled with tension, strength beyond anything human flowing through them. "What is this?" I gasped. "Gifts," the entity replied, "to prepare the vessel, to complete our becoming." Rage exploded within me. At the entity, at my own weakness, at the inevitable loss of control, I lashed out, grabbing the nearest chair and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall like it was made of twigs. The coffee table followed, splitting in two when my foot connected with it. I tore through the cabin, destroying everything in my path with impossible strength. The couch ripped apart in my hands. Shelves snapped from the walls. I stood in the wreckage, panting, surrounded by destruction. This strength wasn't mine. These abilities weren't mine. I was becoming something else, something monstrous. "I won't let you win," I growled. In frustration, I slammed my fist against the floor. The sound that echoed back wasn't the solid thunk of wood, but a hollow, resonant thump. I froze, listening. I struck the floor again, moving a few feet to the side. Solid, back to the first spot. Hollow. I dropped to my knees, pushing aside the remnants of the shredded rug. The floorboards looked identical to the others, but when I pressed, my enhanced vision focused on subtle differences, hairline seams forming a perfect square. My fingers found an almost invisible gap. I dug my nails in and pulled. The trapdoor lifted with surprising ease, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. A sickeningly familiar smell wafted up from below, the same earthy metallic scent I'd encountered at the hikers' campsite. "Home," whispered the entity. "Our sanctuary." I didn't need a flashlight. My enhanced vision pierced the darkness as I descended the stairs, one careful step at a time. Recognition dawned slowly. These walls matched the stone construction from my visions. The same distinctive chisel marks, the same patterns in the rock. The passage opened into a circular chamber and my heart stopped. There they were, the three missing hikers. They sat with backs against the wall, arranged in a triangle. Their skin had taken on an unhealthy paleness, eyes half-lidded, mouths fixed in slight vacant smiles, tubes of some organic material connected to their arms and necks, pulsing slowly with a faint bluish light. The tubes converged at the center of the room, disappearing into the floor. "Hey," I called, rushing forward. "Can you hear me?" None responded. Their eyes didn't track my movement. They seemed to be looking through me at something only they could see. I knelt beside the nearest one, a young woman with matted blonde hair. Her pulse was weak but steady. She lived, yet her life force visibly drained through the tubes, feeding something beneath the chamber. "They nourish us," the entity explained, its voice almost gentle. "Their essence builds our strength. 3 more will join before the spring, then 3 more, the 9 sacrifices to open the door." Horror crashed over me. "You chose this cabin because of this chamber. You knew it was here all along. We have known for centuries. Our faithful built it. We guided you here when you ran from Blackwood Forest, the perfect vessel seeking the perfect refuge." I grabbed at the tubes connected to the woman, trying to pull them free. My hands wouldn't cooperate. They hovered inches from the pulsing conduits, shaking with the effort to move those final inches. "No," I choked out. "I won't let you do this." My body betrayed me. Instead of helping the hikers, I found myself kneeling at the center of their triangle. My hands formed unfamiliar gestures. Words spilled from my lips in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. An incantation to deepen their trance, to make their essence flow more freely. The tubes pulsed brighter. The hikers' smiles widened a fraction. "You cannot stop what is already happening," the entity said. "Your knowledge serves us. Your ranger skills find the perfect victims. Your survival training keeps them alive longer so we may feed longer." I fought with everything I had, trying to regain control of my limbs. Sweat beaded on my forehead from the effort. For an instant, just an instant, I broke through. My hand shot out, grasping one of the tubes. White-hot pain seared through my arm. Vision slammed into me, the altar stone again, blood flowing into carved channels, 9 bodies arranged in a circle, a door opening in reality itself. Something vast and ancient pushing through. I collapsed, gasping as the entity reasserted control. My body rose without my permission. I watched my hands check the hiker's pulses with professional efficiency, adjust the tubes with horrifying precision. Ranger training perverted to serve something inhuman. "We will care for them," the entity assured me. "Their strength becomes our strength. Their life becomes our life. By spring, we will be ready." "For what?" I managed to ask, though my lips barely moved. "For our complete manifestation. For the door to open fully. For the smiling one to walk the world again." I stared at the hikers, their expressions frozen in those slight, dreamy smiles. They couldn't see me, couldn't hear me. They were trapped in visions the entity fed them, just as I was trapped in my own body. "I'll stop you," I whispered, though I had no idea how. "I'll find a way." The entity's laughter echoed inside my skull, a chorus of overlapping voices. "You cannot stop what you are becoming, Connor Hayes. You will smile when the darkness comes." My own face reflected in a pool of water on the chamber floor, eyes glowing with unnatural light, mouth stretched in a smile too large for any human face. 2 days had passed since my discovery of the hidden chamber beneath my cabin. 2 days of fighting for control against the entity inside me as its influence grew stronger. When Sheriff Reeves called to organize another search party for the missing hikers, I almost refused. I knew where they truly were, trapped in that chamber, their life force being drained. But the entity wouldn't let me speak the truth. The morning dawned with a brittle chill. Frost clung to the trees and crunched beneath our boots as we gathered at the trailhead. "All right, listen up," she called to the assembled volunteers. "We're expanding our search grid today. These kids have been missing for almost a week now. If they're still out here." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Deputy Collins stood beside her, his expression carefully blank. The twig doll I'd noticed before was absent from his pocket, but something about the way his eyes tracked me made my skin crawl. "Hayes," Sheriff Reeves motioned me over. "You're with Team 3, Eastern Quadrant. You know that terrain better than anyone." I nodded, trying to appear normal despite the pressure building behind my eyes. "We'll find them," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. "I hope so." Her gaze lingered on my face. "You look different today." Before I could respond, she turned away to assign the remaining teams. I joined my group, a mix of park staff and local volunteers, all grim-faced and determined. We set off into the forest, spreading out into our search formation. An hour into the search, I noticed the first symbol. It appeared on an ancient oak tree carved deep into the bark, the same spiraling pattern etched on my skin. It seemed to pulse with a faint bluish glow. I stopped, staring at it. "You see something?" called one of the volunteers, a middle-aged man whose name I'd already forgotten. I pointed at the tree. "This marking. Could be a trail sign." He approached the tree. "What marking?" I looked at him, then back at the symbol. It glowed more intensely now, practically vibrating with energy. "Right here," I insisted, tracing the outline with my finger. He shook his head. "Nothing there, man. Just old bark." A chill ran through me. Either I was hallucinating or the symbols were meant only for me. The entity stirred inside, pleased by this realization. "My mistake," I muttered. "Let's keep moving." But more symbols appeared as we continued, each one visible only to me. They formed a clear path, leading away from our designated search area. An overwhelming compulsion to follow them grew with each step. "I think I see something." I lied to my team. "I'll check it out in radio if I find anything." Before anyone could object, I moved toward the nearest symbol, drawn by its pulsing light. The further I walked, the stronger the pull became. Behind me, the voices of my search team faded. I should have felt alarmed, but a strange calm settled over me instead. This was inevitable. This was destined. The symbols led me deeper into the forest, into areas I'd never patrolled. The trees grew older here, more primeval. Moss hung in thick curtains from ancient branches. The ground sloped gradually downward into a natural depression. I realized with a start that the forest had gone completely silent. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, no scurrying animals. Even the wind seemed to die at the edge of this place. At the center of the depression stood a stone altar, weathered by centuries of exposure yet still bearing intricate carvings along its sides, the same spiraling symbols that had led me here. The altar stone sat in the middle of a perfectly circular clearing where nothing grew, the ground bare and oddly smooth. A figure knelt before the altar, head bowed over an open book. Even from behind I recognized her, the pale skin, the long dark hair, the unnatural stillness of her posture. Abby Carter. She didn't turn as I approached, yet she spoke as if she'd been expecting me. "The vessel arrives," she said, her voice oddly melodic. Right on time, I stopped several feet away. "You're Abby Carter." She rose fluidly and turned to face me. Her smile stretched too wide across her face, revealing perfect teeth, a mirror image of the expression I'd seen on my own face during my blackouts. "I am Abby," she confirmed, "one of many names I've worn." Her eyes held ancient knowledge that contradicted her youthful appearance. She gestured to the book open on the altar, bound in what appeared to be human skin, its pages yellowed with age. "You have questions," she said. "The answers are here, as they have always been." I took a step closer, drawn by morbid curiosity and the entity's hunger for knowledge. "What is this place?" I asked. "A binding site," she replied. "One of 7 across this continent. Places where the veil between dimensions wears thin, where the smiling one can reach through." She ran her fingers lovingly over the book's pages. "My parents failed in their duty. They were meant to prepare you, properly, gradually. Instead, they grew afraid. They tried to stop what cannot be stopped." "Your parents," I said. "The bodies in the mine shaft." Her smile didn't falter. "They served their purpose until fear overcame devotion. They forgot that I am not merely their daughter." Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "I am an extension of the Smiling One's will, born of the previous vessel, as all shepherds are." The implication hit me. "You're saying you're not human?" "Not entirely," she agreed, "just as you are becoming something more than human." She stepped aside, gesturing for me to approach the altar. Against my better judgment, I did. The book lay open to pages covered in symbols identical to those on my skin, accompanied by text in a language I'd never seen yet somehow understood. "You were chosen long ago," Abby said as I stared at the pages. "When you were 8 years old, you crossed through ritual grounds in Blackwood Forest. Do you remember?" Memories surfaced, a family camping trip wandering away from our site, finding strange stones arranged in a circle, the sudden headache that had lasted for days afterward. "You were marked then," she continued. "The entity guided your path, your interest in forestry, your assignment to Blackwood, your discovery of the first sacrifice, all orchestrated to bring you here now." My hands trembled as I turned a page in the ancient book. "The hikers," I said. "The twig dolls. What do they mean?" "The 9 sacrifices form the key," she explained. "The dolls form a map when properly assembled, a map to this binding site. Each sacrifice marks a point of power. Each life strengthens the vessel." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a twig doll similar to those I'd found at the campsite, offering it to me. "Take it," she urged. "Complete your collection. Find the pattern." I accepted it, feeling a rush of connection as my fingers closed around the crude figure. The entity surged within me, recognizing something familiar in this offering. "I've been fighting this," I admitted, my voice hardly sounding like my own, trying to stop it. Abby's expression softened with what looked almost like compassion. "Fighting only causes pain. The change is inevitable. You were chosen because you are strong enough to contain what comes next." She closed the book and lifted it from the altar, holding it out to me. "Take this too. Learn what you must become. Prepare for the final phase at the spring equinox." As I reached for the book, our fingers brushed. A jolt of recognition passed between us, a shared awareness of the entity's presence. For a moment I saw her true nature beneath the human disguise, something ancient and patient, wearing flesh like a borrowed coat. Yet rather than fear, I felt a strange kinship. She was like me, or rather I was becoming like her. A vessel, a doorway. "They'll be looking for me," I said, clutching the book to my chest. "Then go," she replied. "We'll meet again when the time is right. When the ninth sacrifice is prepared. I turned to leave, then paused. Sheriff Reeves, she suspects something. Abby's smile widened impossibly further. The sheriff has her role to play as well. All paths lead to the binding site. All players move toward their destined positions. The book felt warm against my chest as I made my way back through the forest, following the glowing symbols in reverse. The entity hummed with satisfaction inside me, pleased with our acquisition. I should have been terrified of what awaited me. Instead, I felt an unnatural calm settling over me. The forest sounds returned gradually as I left the binding site behind. In the distance, I heard my name being called. The search party looking for their lost member. I tucked the book inside my jacket and straightened my posture. As I rejoined the normal world, I practiced a normal expression, pushing down the smile that threatened to stretch too wide across my face. The book burned against my chest now as I drove back to my cabin, its ancient knowledge calling to me. I'd managed to rejoin the search party with a lie about following a false trail, but Sheriff Reeves's suspicious gaze had followed me for the remainder of the afternoon, now, alone in my truck, with darkness falling. I pulled the book from my jacket and placed it on the passenger seat. I barely recognized my own hands on the steering wheel, the skin pale, veins pulsing with that unnatural blue light. My transformation was accelerating. When I reached the cabin, I found Abby waiting on the porch, still as a statue. No breath clouded the air in front of her despite the frigid temperature. "It's time," she said simply. I nodded, unable to resist the pull of what was coming next. Blackwood Forest, North Ridge, the binding site, awaits. Within an hour we were on the road in my Ranger vehicle, the ancient book between us on the console. The entity had grown stronger since our meeting at the altar, pushing my consciousness further into the background. I watched through my own eyes as my body operated the vehicle on its own. "Tell me," my voice said, though I hadn't formed the words. "Tell me what you remember of before." Abby turned to me, recognition flashing in her eyes. She wasn't speaking to me, but to the thing inside me. "Fragments only," she replied. "The void between dimensions, the hunger, the patience." My mouth moved again, the entity now speaking freely through me. "We waited so long watching through cracks in reality, learning your languages, your fears, your weaknesses. The faithful kept your memory alive." Abby said, generation after generation. A laugh escaped my throat, a terrible layered sound of multiple voices speaking in unison, humans so eager to worship what they don't understand. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I fought for control, managing only to turn my head slightly toward the passenger window. Outside, a herd of deer bolted from the tree line as we passed, fleeing in terror. Further down, a group of crows took flight from a telephone wire, their wings beating frantically against the evening sky. "They sense you growing stronger," Abby observed. "They should fear us," my voice replied. "We will reshape this natural world into something more beautiful, more honest." "How?" I forced the word through clenched teeth, briefly wresting control of my own vocal cords. The entity paused, perhaps surprised by my resistance. Then it answered, using my voice, but with that unsettling chorus effect underlying each word. "Your world is built on lies, creatures pretending to be separate from one another, individual, independent. We will show the truth that all life is connected. One consciousness expressing itself through infinite forms. By destroying everything, I managed to say. By transforming everything, it corrected. The 9 sacrifices open the door. What comes through will unmake the boundaries between minds, between bodies, between dimensions." I lost control again as we continued driving through the night. For hours, the entity spoke through me, revealing its ancient origins. It described watching Earth form from cosmic dust, waiting as life evolved, testing the boundaries between worlds when primitive humans first developed consciousness capable of perception beyond the physical. The first vessel was a shaman who sought power beyond human understanding, my mouth explained to Abby. He welcomed us, but his form was too weak. We learned from this failure. Each attempted manifestation taught us more about human biology, human psychology, human weakness. We stopped twice for gas. Each time I noticed how the station attendants stared at me with uneasy expressions. At the second stop, a young woman backed away when I approached the counter, her eyes widening at whatever she saw in my face. "Your appearance is changing more rapidly now," Abby commented as we returned to the vehicle. "The vessel is adapting." I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror, my skin paper white, eyes sunken and glowing with that eerie light. My smile stretched too wide, teeth looking somehow sharper, more numerous than before. "How much of me will be left?" I asked during a rare moment of control. Abby's expression almost looked pitying, enough to remember being human. The perfect vessel retains humanity while transcending it. Night had fallen completely by the time we reached the borders of Blackwood Forest. The entity guided my hands on the wheel, turning onto unmarked Forest Service roads, then eventually off-road entirely. We jolted along a barely visible trail until finally stopping at the base of North Ridge. "We walk from here," Abby said, gathering the book. I emerged from the vehicle, my movements no longer entirely my own. The forest around us had gone silent. No insects chirping, no nocturnal animals calling. My enhanced vision pierced the darkness, revealing the path ahead clearly. We climbed for nearly an hour, following glowing symbols visible only to us. The forest grew more primeval as we ascended. The trees ancient and twisted, their branches reaching toward us like gnarled fingers. Near the summit, Abby stopped abruptly. "The Guardian," she said, pointing to a massive oak with a hollow center. I approached, drawn by a familiar smell, that same earthy metallic scent from the chamber beneath my cabin. Inside the hollow trunk sat a preserved corpse, positioned upright as if keeping watch. The body wore the tattered remains of a sheriff's uniform, the badge still pinned to the chest. Sheriff James Tanner. His skin had the same waxy, preserved appearance as the hikers in my basement. His mouth was fixed in that same terrible smile. And like the carters in the mine shaft, every tooth had been removed from his gaping mouth. "He discovered too much," Abby explained. "Fought too hard against his role. So he became the Guardian instead of the messenger." "Collins is predecessor," I said, recognizing the name from the files. "He investigated the Carters for decades." Abby nodded. "His sacrifice strengthened the binding site. His essence feeds the soil." She reached out, touching the corpse's cheek with something like affection. "All who resist eventually serve." We continued to the summit. There, bathed in moonlight, stood the same altar I'd seen in my visions. Stone circles surrounded it, arranged in intricate patterns. A circle of ash marked the ground where ritual fires had burned. "The final sacrifice approaches," Abby said, opening the ancient book. "Deputy Collins brings what we need." "What sacrifice?" I forced the question through my increasingly unresponsive lips. She looked up from the pages, her eyes reflecting starlight. "The ninth offering must be someone you truly care about, someone with a connection to your soul. Their sacrifice completes the vessel's transformation, opens the door fully." Horror washed through me. "Who?" "You know who," she replied. "The one who suspects but still hopes to save you. Sheriff Reeves." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I fought against the entity with renewed desperation, clawing for control of my own body. For a brief moment I broke through. "I won't let you hurt her." I gasped, my voice sounding like my own again. Abby didn't seem concerned by my resistance. The vessel always fights hardest at the end. It changes nothing. She handed me the book, open to pages showing detailed diagrams of the ritual site. Despite my struggle, my body began following the instructions, arranging stones in specific patterns, creating a circle of twig dolls around the altar, preparing the site for what was to come. As I worked, I noticed something about the altar stone itself. 9 small depressions had been carved into its surface in a specific pattern. When I placed the tooth I'd taken from the campsite into one of these depressions, it fit perfectly. "The 9 teeth," I said, understanding dawning. "They form a key." Abby nodded, pleased. "The key that unlocks the door. 8 have been collected. The 9th will complete it." I continued preparing the site, all while fighting for control, searching desperately for some weakness in the ceremony. The book described each step in precise detail, but certain passages seemed deliberately obscured, as if some knowledge was being withheld even from the vessel. Night deepened around us. The forest had grown unnaturally still. The trees seemed to bend inward toward the clearing, their branches creating a cathedral-like dome above the altar. They were watching, waiting. In the distance, I heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Then footsteps on the path below, multiple sets. "He comes," Abby said, smiling that terrible smile. "And he brings your sheriff." The 9th sacrifice approaches. I stared down at my hands, arranging the final stones in their pattern. Though I appeared to be following the entity's will, I focused on a single thought. I would find a way to stop this, if not to save myself, then to save Catherine Reeves. The entity detected my resistance and laughed using my voice, that chorus of overlapping tones echoing across the clearing. "You cannot stop what is already in motion," it said through my smiling mouth. The door opens. The smiling one comes. I fought for control of my own hands as they arranged the final stones around the altar. Abby stood nearby, her smile gleaming in the moonlight as she watched my internal struggle with detached fascination. My ears caught the sound first. Tires on the rough forest road below, then car doors slamming. Multiple sets of footsteps began ascending the trail toward our clearing, crushing leaves and snapping twigs. "He comes," Abby said, her voice carrying unnatural harmonics. "And he brings what we need." The 9th sacrifice approaches. I fought harder against the entity, managing to slow my movement slightly as I placed the 8th tooth in its depression on the altar stone. My body trembled with the effort, sweat beading on my unnaturally pale skin despite the cold night air. "They're early," I managed to say with my own voice. "The ritual isn't complete." Abby's eyes flickered to mine, recognizing the moment of control I'd seized. "It matters not. The vessel fights, but cannot win." The footsteps grew louder. 2 people, one moving confidently, the other stumbling, being dragged along. A branch snapped, followed by a woman's voice. "This is madness, Collins. You can't possibly believe silence." Deputy Collins' voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. They emerged into the clearing. Collins had changed from his uniform into dark robes embroidered with the spiraling symbols. His face was painted with markings that matched those carved into my skin. In one hand, he held a ceremonial knife with a curved blade. With his other, he roughly guided Professor Morgan, her hands bound with thick rope. My heart plummeted. I'd expected Sheriff Reeves. The entity had made me believe she would be the 9th sacrifice. But now Professor Morgan's terrified eyes met mine across the clearing, widening in horror at what she saw. "Connor," she whispered, her voice breaking. I wanted to respond, to tell her to run, but the entity surged forward, reclaiming control of my vocal cords. My mouth stretched into that terrible smile. "The vessel welcomes you, Professor," the entity said through me, its layered voice echoing in the still night air. "Your knowledge has served us well. Now your essence will complete our becoming." Collins shoved Professor Morgan forward, causing her to stumble and fall to her knees before the altar. He bowed deeply toward me. "No," toward the thing inside me. "High Shepherd," he addressed me formally. "I bring the 9th sacrifice as promised, the woman who sought to interfere with your manifestation." Abby approached Collins, taking the ritual knife from his hands. "You have served faithfully, messenger. The eternal smile welcomes your devotion." Professor Morgan looked between us, her initial fear hardening into something else. Determination. Despite her bound hands, she straightened her spine, meeting my gaze directly. "Connor," she said firmly, "remember our conversation in my office about the entity's requirements?" The entity hissed inside my skull, trying to block her words, but I clung to them desperately. The texts were clear. She continued quickly. "The final sacrifice must be willing. That's why they've always used cult members in the past. The door cannot open unless—" Collins struck her across the face, silencing her enough. Blood trickled from Professor Morgan's split lip, but her eyes never left mine. In them, I saw not just fear, but recognition. She could still see me fighting inside this transforming body. The entity roared within me, rage building at her defiance. My body stepped forward, hand outstretched to receive the ritual knife from Abby. The ninth tooth, extracted from Sheriff Tanner's corpse, sat ready in my pocket. "The time has come," Abby intoned, placing the knife in my trembling hand. "Complete the circle. Open the door. Let the smiling one walk among us." I stood over Professor Morgan, knife raised, my body no longer my own. The entity pushed me to strike, to complete what had started centuries ago. But Professor Morgan's words had sparked something, a realization. Possible way out. Willing. The sacrifice had to be willing. The entity couldn't force the final offering. It needed consent. True, genuine sacrifice. That was why it had manipulated events, trying to make me believe Sheriff Reeves would be the victim. It knew I cared for her, knew that part of me might sacrifice myself to save her. In that moment of clarity, I gathered every fragment of humanity I had left. With monumental effort, I changed the knife's trajectory. Instead of plunging into Professor Morgan's heart, I drove the blade into my own chest. "No!" Abby shrieked, the sound inhuman. Hot blood poured down my chest as I staggered backward. The entity thrashed wildly inside me, its control weakening as my life essence drained. I fell against the altar stone, blood spilling across the arranged teeth. Wrong sacrifice. I gasped, my own voice returning fully for the first time in days. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The blood, my blood, the vessel's blood, touched each of the ritual teeth, creating a connection that rapidly destabilized. The air around us began to distort, reality bending inward like fabric being torn. "What have you done?" Collins shouted, his face contorted with rage and fear. Professor Morgan scrambled to her feet, backing away from the altar. A wind that wasn't natural howled through the clearing, whipping her gray hair around her face. "Connor!" she called out. I collapsed to my knees, the knife still embedded in my chest. "Run," I croaked. Abby and Collins weren't running. They stood transfixed, staring at the center of the altar where a doorway was forming, not the controlled portal they had planned, but a chaotic tear in reality. Unnatural light poured through it, bathing them in sickly blue radiance. "The vessel rejects you," I told the entity inside me, blood bubbling between my lips. "Find another way home." The entity screamed, a sound of such ancient fury that the trees around us bent away as if in terror. I felt it being torn from my body, not emerging triumphantly as planned, but being ripped away violently, painfully. Professor Morgan reached me somehow, pulling me away from the altar with surprising strength. Together we stumbled down the path as the vortex grew behind us, consuming everything in its path. I looked back once. Abby and Colin stood paralyzed, their bodies elongating impossibly as they were drawn into the chaotic portal. Between the trees, partially visible, I could see it, the smiling one, a distortion in reality with that terrible too-wide smile filled with countless teeth. It reached toward me with limbs that shouldn't exist, trapped between dimensions, unable to fully manifest. "It's still there," I gasped as Professor Morgan helped me into Colin's abandoned vehicle. Still watching, waiting. "Save your strength," she urged, starting the engine with shaking hands. "The book," I said, clutching her arm with bloody fingers. "You need to burn it. Burn my body with it when I'm gone. Scatter the ashes in running water." Her eyes filled with tears. "Connor, you might survive. Promise me," I insisted, feeling life draining away. "It will try again. New vessel, new cycle." She nodded finally, accelerating down the mountain road. "I promise." Behind us, the clearing at North Ridge collapsed in on itself. Blue light shooting skyward before winking out like a dying star. The entity had been denied its full manifestation, but I knew with terrible certainty that it wasn't gone. Just thwarted, waiting. As darkness closed around me, I hoped it would be enough. 3 months later, a new ranger arrived at the renovated cabin. The bloodstains had been removed. The hidden chamber beneath filled with concrete. The forest around it seemed peaceful again, birds singing in the spring sunshine. The young ranger set down her bags, exploring her new home with enthusiasm. A fresh start, she'd been told. The previous ranger had suffered a tragic accident. Details vague, records sealed. As she turned to unpack, something caught her eye on the windowsill. A small twig doll that hadn't been there moments before. She picked it up, examining the crude figure with curiosity. unaware of the presence watching from between the trees outside. In the gathering darkness, a figure stood motionless, its smile stretched unnaturally wide as it watched and waited for the cycle to begin once again. Hello, friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did. Also, don't forget to press the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. From which country or city do you follow the channel?